Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, there are growing international calls for Eritrean troops rumoured to be supporting federal troops in the region of Tigray to withdraw as unrest continues and the government announces the closure of 2 refugee camps. Also, Central African Republic says that pro-government forces have retaken the town of Bouar from rebels. The country's struggling with deepening insecurity, fighting which has forced thousands of families to take refuge on the outskirts of Bangui, the capital. And South Africa's coronavirus alcohol bans have been lifted, but not before costing the country's wine industry hundreds of millions of euros. But first, one person was reportedly shot dead in the capital of the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray on Tuesday. Witnesses claimed that soldiers opened fire on an anti-government protest in Mekele. Federal forces launched military operations in Tigray in November, and although Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed did say that the local TPLF forces were defeated, fighting continues. There are claims of rights abuses and fears about a deepening humanitarian crisis. There are growing international calls for Eritrean troops rumoured to be supporting Addis Ababa in the region to withdraw. Ethiopia denies their presence. This week, the government said it planned to close 2 refugee camps in Tigray. Maria Gerth-Nicolescu has more.
There are still 20,000 Eritrean refugees missing from Ethiopia's Tigray region, according to the United Nations. 2 refugee camps in the northern part of the region remain completely inaccessible to aid agencies. According to witnesses, the Hitsats and Shimelda camps have been largely destroyed, with many refugees forced to escape to other camps. Others are believed to be hiding, and there have also been reports of forced returns to Eritrea. There were Eritrean refugees who were able to escape describe scenes of extreme violence, including killings and lootings by Eritrean soldiers. The Ethiopian Refugee Agency said that it is planning to close those 2 camps because of the insecurity and because of their proximity to the Eritrean border, with remaining refugees to be either relocated to other camps or integrated into society. Now, 25 UN staff members have now been allowed into the Tigray region, and mobile services are resuming, but there's still insecurity in many parts of the region, and humanitarian aid is still not reaching everyone. The European Union called on Monday for the first time for the withdrawal of Eritrean troops from Tigray, a statement labeled as appalling by Eritrea's information minister, with the country still denying any involvement in the Tigray conflict.
Maria Gerth-Nicolescu there for us. Now, the EU's urged DR Congo to reopen the investigation into the murder of a high-profile human rights activist. Floribert Chebeya headed up a group called Voice for the Voiceless. He was found murdered on the outskirts of Kinshasa in 2010. Several policemen were convicted of his killing, but new evidence has come to light. Clément Bonnereau has more.
The assassination of Floribert Chebeya and Fidel Bazana in June 2010 is one of the most significant and gruesome examples of political repression under former President Joseph Kabila. Chebeya was the executive director of a human rights group known as La Voix des Sans Voix, Voice of the Voiceless, which he created when he was just 20 years old. Bazana was his driver and also a member of that organization. Both men were coldly murdered in Kinshasa after being called to the police station the previous day. Chebeya's body was found in his car on the outskirts of the Congolese capital. 5 policemen were convicted, including 3 of them in absentia, but most civil society organizations have condemned what they say is a travesty of justice. Interest in the case has been revived by new evidence from 2 policemen who say they took part in the gruesome murder. They insist it was orchestrated by the then head of DR Congo's police force, General John Numbi, and they also say that they know where Bazana was buried. This new evidence has prompted calls from human rights groups and Western diplomats to reopen the case and ensure a fair trial. The pressure is now on for President Felix Tshisekedi, who has promised to end impunity in DR Congo.
There. Look now at some news in brief. Ethiopia has secured 9 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. The country is hoping to inoculate at least a fifth of the population by the end of the year. It's procured its doses through the global COVAX distribution scheme. Meanwhile, the continent is adapting to concerns about the AstraZeneca shot, which trial data suggests offers minimal protection against the South African variant of the virus. The discovery is a disappointment as the vaccine is seen as one of the best suited to be used in hotter climates. On Tuesday, Eswatini said it would no longer use the shot after South Africa said it would be putting its rollout of the AstraZeneca stock on hold. Protests broke out in Nyala in Darfur on Tuesday. Rallies were held in condemnation of the rising cost of living. Elsewhere in Port Sudan, schools were suspended after students took to the streets over the spike in the costs of staples. Sudan is going through a rocky transition ever since the ouster in April 2019 of former leader Omar al-Bashir. He was toppled after economic hardship triggered mass protests against his rule. At least 23 people have been killed by attacks by armed gangs across 5 districts in northwestern Nigeria. The raids in Kaduna State happened over 24 hours, targeting Benin Gwara, Giwa, Chikun, Igabi, and Kauru. Benin Gauri was worst hit, with 10 people being killed there. The government's under pressure to rein in an explosion of northern criminal groups exploiting the insecurity that's followed an ongoing extremist insurgency. Now, Central African Republic says that pro-government forces have retaken the town of Bouar. It had been partially held by rebels since late December. The country struggling with deepening insecurity. Clashes continue between armed groups and the army, supported by its Russian and Rwandan allies. After an attack by militia on the capital in mid-January, the military has ramped up operations, and that fighting has forced thousands of families to take refuge on the outskirts of Bangui. Our correspondent, Clement Di Roma, went to meet them.
On the outskirts of Bangui, the Central African capital, 2,500 took refuge in this school. 3 weeks ago, they fled heavy clashes between rebels and the army. Fighting that has raged around the capital since mid-January. Eric Biro is the chief of one of the attacked villages. He's just a few kilometers from here. He managed to escape, but wasn't able to take anything with him.
Nous vivons comme des animaux, parce que nous avons quitté sans porter des bagages, même des nattes pour nous asseoir. Au début, nous sommes sur la terre. Il y a des morts là-bas sur le terrain chez moi. Il y a beaucoup de morts. Il y a des cadavres un peu partout dans la bourse.
The displaced have very limited means. They've survived for 3 weeks, relying on a few aid deliveries from humanitarian organizations. But their situation remains precarious. This farmer and his wife carefully measure out what little food they have left for the month.
C'est pas beaucoup. Et pourtant, j'ai 5 enfants. Mais ça là, comment je vais faire? Dans une semaine, ça va terminer. Mais qu'est-ce qu'on va manger?
Around this school, more than 400 families live without running water, without electricity, and with very scarce food stocks. Without urgent help from the government and humanitarian organizations, the situation of those displaced around Bangui could get even worse. NGOs fear shortages because of road blockages caused by the conflict. Food prices have already tripled in the country.
Les stocks alimentaires et humanitaires se réduisent de jour en jour. Et nous, on a de quoi tenir quelques semaines, voire quelques mois. Mais si la situation ne s'améliore pas rapidement, ça va être extrêmement critique pour la population.
Across the Central African Republic, more than 240,000 people have been forced from their homes since rebels first launched attacks in mid-December. 2 million people in the country are believed to already be food insecure.
Report by Clement Di Roma. Now, South Africa lifted its latest ban on alcohol at the start of the month. It was the third in a year, all aimed at reducing the number of alcohol-related injuries and lightening the load on hospitals struggling to deal with coronavirus. However, the restrictions have cost the country's wine industry hundreds of millions of euros. Nicolas Chemin has more.
The third ban in a year on alcohol sales was lifted in South Africa. The restrictions were taken by the government to ease the number of trauma cases in hospitals burdened by coronavirus patients. The wine industry was relieved, but it says the 3 bans have already cost it more than 400 million euros.
To be honest with you, we don't know how we're going to take this thing forward, because we had 3 lockdowns specifically on the wine industry. And how it affected us with revenue was almost putting us back 2 years.
The wine industry in South Africa employs 269,000 people. Some believe the government's handling of the crisis has been misguided.
The biggest challenge obviously has been the alcohol ban, but I think hand in hand we need to look at new ways of managing the abuse of alcohol rather than just an outright clampdown.
South Africa now has more than 300 million litres of surplus wine that has not been sold. Many vineyards are faced with a storage dilemma. Do they throw away last year's production that is still in the casks? Or do they cut this year's grapes and let them rot? Either way, the wine surplus will inevitably lead to a fall in prices and bring more bad news to the industry.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.